Welcome back. This is part 8 of Sibylla's story. Let's continue the journey with the new chapter, titled Teach Us to Pray. The night seems long, my father. Shadows rise, and dark across my pathway fall. There is no light of dawn in orient skies, and sorrow shrouds me like a pall. The stars of faith and hope so dim have grown. Oh, rift the gloom and send their radiance down. The severe winter, the early spring, the hot summer were followed by a glowing autumn. Like coals of fire the sun lay on the fields and meadows of Larkov, day after day, singeing what still held up its head there, and what would make efforts to ripen its fruit. Herr Bolton shook his head despairingly at the prospect. "Everything comes at once," he groaned. "Cattle plague, failure of crops, lawsuit. Ulhart is right. I must try to gain in some other way what I lose here. If my stocks only go up, I can bear it. Hedda," he called to his coachman, "has the newspaper come yet?" With intense impatience he awaited the stock journal. His first glance fell on the gold market, and with its rise and fall fluctuated his everyday humor. Sibylla moved restlessly through her large house. Was there nowhere therein a cozy corner where good spirits were concealed, who could deliver her and allure the sunshine to this unattractive home, where she could find no brightness? Would they not reveal themselves to conquer and dwell as victors by this hearth? Was there nothing home-like to be discovered here? Alas, no. Home is only truly found where love and good nature reign. Good nature? That characteristic had always been insufferably tiresome to Sibylla. Her mind climbed higher. But now she was always so fearful and anxious, she would have been glad to summon the most tediously good-natured being in the world, if he were only true, in order to seek help and direction. She was so terribly alone. The servants trembled before the capricious humor and frequent angry outbursts of the master. The misfortunes which had befallen the estate seemed to have fallen like a weight on his better nature. The old housekeeper kept up a lamentation in the cellar and wandered through the house like a grim Cassandra. Herr Bolton was constantly perturbed. Usually kindly toward his wife, he nevertheless gave her no glimpse of his business affairs. "Women don't understand money matters," he would say positively, being wholly influenced by the presence of Ulhart. "That is your work," Sibylla's eyes flashed upon the hateful interloper. "That is my work," gave back his villainous eyes vindictively. Oh, how Sibylla repented that she had not invited her husband's confidence in the first months of their married life, when he would have gladly interested her in his wool sacks and money. She would now have been able to advise him, for her practical judgment was more alert than one would have suspected in a spoiled, giddy girl, and Ulhart could never have obtained the supremacy which he now exerted over her weak husband. What was the wily doctor's real desire? For what was he working? What was his aim? These questions revolved in Sibylla's mind night and day. Undoubtedly, first, he desired to triumph over her, to sting her with 1,000 needles. He knew her capacity for suffering, how exceedingly proud her heart was. But he had already accomplished this. Whither did he drive his husband further? Would he ruin him and reduce him to beggary? That was devilish. But what of that if he feathered his own nest? Sibylla knew he was not rich, that he worked little but required much. He enjoyed the best wines, he loved to be surrounded with luxuries and mingle in the best society, besides having all kinds of exalted notions which he pursued when he so disposed. She trembled. She felt herself in his power. She saw her husband tottering to the ground without being able to help him. Her imagination had been given full play during this desolation and pictured the worst. She detested Ulhart's presence, and yet she entered into it because her husband could at least be free of harm while she was at his side.
Ulhart knew her fear of poverty and dread of work. Ha! Should he make her poor and compel her to labor? Should she even be obliged to ask for aid from his hand? Never, she exclaimed inwardly. Die, rather. Die, and yet she feared death so much. How she had always banished it from her mind, the gloomy guest, was angry and resentful when he drew his fatal scythe in the circle of her butterfly life. And was not mythology on this very account so beautiful, because it did not preach death and corruption, but only eternal youth, eternal beauty, eternal happiness? She who had often sung, "This beautiful world still rules," with joy for its leading strings, this same Sibylla now cried, "Die rather." She had now been married 1 year. Tomorrow would be Christmas Eve, and she wished to surprise her husband pleasantly. She had also provided for the enjoyment of her household, and had left nothing undone for the occasion. Sibylla's deeds were always far better than her words. She hesitated to begin work, but once entered upon, she engaged in it so heartily that the pleasure of accomplishing something made the exertion forgotten. She ran up and down stairs, stopping here and arranging there. When she saw the large hall so festively adorned, with its great fir tree in the center, the beauty of her position, which enabled her to do so much for the pleasure of others, came upon her with great force. Oh, perhaps she might yet become a good housewife and faithful mistress to all those around her. All sinister thoughts vanished, as they must ever pale before happy employment. No, everything could not be completed this day. How fortunate there was still another! She was confident her husband would return at 6 o'clock. Then everything would be ready, and she would lead him into the gay, bright hall. Perhaps when he found his home so pleasant, he would be more amiable and remain longer. Promptly at the time, the carriage was at the station. As soon as Sibylla heard the rolling of the wheels, she lit up the tree. She was as happy as a child. For the first time she was enabled to present so many gifts, and it was like the elixir of new wine in its effects. Now she stood waiting at the door. "Come in, dear Edward, see what the Christ-child has brought." "Yes," he replied, "but see first what he brings to you, a guest." Standing in the light hall, Sibylla was unable to recognize the form in her husband's rear. But today anything was possible. She was greeted by the sarcastic tones of Ulhart. That man again? Just when she had been occupied with the thought of providing pleasure for her husband, he had been moved to do what should embitter her most. This time, however, she wronged him. It had not been his intention to bring Ulhart. The impudent doctor had invited himself, and Herr Bolton was now too much dependent upon him not to present a cheerful face over a bitter pill. Sibylla controlled herself, but her happiness was fled. She was scarcely able to say a pleasant word to anyone. "My dear madam, your kind hand has provided for everyone but me. Please follow the example of him who maketh the rain to fall on the unjust and the just. Have you not something for me?" For an instant Sibylla was silent. Her heart throbbed wildly. "Yes, I have something for you, something very wonderful." She sat down at the piano and ran her fingers over the keys. "You have often expressed a desire to hear me sing. Hitherto I have not found myself in condition to gratify you, but today, on account of the festival, I shall sing." She softened the tones somewhat and gave that grand aria with frightful, terrible expression. "He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh, the Lord shall have them in derision. Thou shalt break them with a rod of iron, thou shalt dash them to pieces like a potter's vessel."
As the words were repeated again and again, it was no longer Sibylla flinging them in her power upon the unbidden guest, but a prophetic voice. Even to herself, the true meaning of the aria entered her soul as never before, and it was like the defense to her of an omnipotent one who ruled and triumphed over all godlessness. Ulhart understood Sibylla perfectly. For a moment he shrank from the power whose aid she invoked and upon which she relied, but only for a moment. "There is no God," he said to himself. "Even this God is only a clever man." He had sunken from step to step. There had been a time when he waged an unsuccessful battle between pleasure and duty, but the claims of life and the commands of Christ had never entered the threshold of his selfish heart, and he threw them aside and endeavored to harmonize at all hazards his own desires with what might be regarded as duty, and he desired no inward monitor to suggest anything else. Religion is something primordial, and when its innermost germ is wickedly and wantonly eliminated by a person, it sometimes reappears faintly, as the dead body may be momentarily quickened by chemical processes. From this time, Ulhart renewed the battle more energetically than ever before. These new allies on Sibylla's side animated him to still greater triumphs. Soon after the festival, he left Larkov, but Herr Bolton became daily more distrustful. He had burdened his estate with mortgages in order to obtain cash to purchase stocks which promised extraordinary gain. After these stocks had held a dizzy height for a time, they suddenly fell. He hastened, full of terror, to Berlin to consult Ulhart, who advised him to sell in order to escape further loss. Bolton hoped for a rise, but they fell persistently, day after day. He consoled himself that, as he did not actually need their conversion into money, he would allow them to lie even for years until better times came. His lawsuit followed and was lost, including an expensive fine as well as the costs. What should he do? He had nothing to dispose of but the depreciated stocks, yet he must be glad if he realized half the investment. Even this was uncertain. Distracted in heart, ruined in fortune, he returned to Larkov. Ulhart himself was alarmed. It had come so suddenly. He had not desired this. To hold Bolton in his hand, to rule him, to make a profitable business out of him in the course of time, to annoy Sibylla continually was his aim. But now, what could he do against pestilence and crop failure? Could he be blamed if the fire he had enkindled in this weak Bolton, instead of climbing up lightly, broke out suddenly in clear flames? He had indeed induced him to speculate, but never so rashly and precipitously. He had advised him to give up some of his acquisitions in order to increase his fortune, but he had not contemplated the whole sacrifice of his farm business. Cunning man, did you not know that when a feeble spirit destroys old fetters without gaining some mastery, it is only brought to ruin? Ulhart himself showed himself as a friend. He came to comfort Bolton and endeavor to make him forget his misfortunes, the easiest and best way, in his opinion, in a bottle of wine. There was nothing else to do but keep him in a room under its influence. How would Sibylla feel when she should see her husband enter her room, intoxicated, with Ulhart in his rear, in cutting sarcasm repeating, "My dear madame, be lenient with your husband"? This was repeated 2, 3, 4 times, until at length she listened to his coming with dread, exhausting every means to lead him from this dangerous way. How the minutes of such waiting resolved themselves into hours, the hours into eternity! How much Sibylla would like to show Ulhart the door, but he remained a fixture by her husband's authority. It was now the latter days of the period for deer hunting, and great vigilance was required from the foresters to prevent acts of violence. Night after night, their faithful servant lay on the watch to keep injury from his district. Sibylla stopped one evening at his cottage just as his wife was giving him her farewell kiss and parting injunction. She said, "Are you not anxious for your husband?" She replied, "Oh, no, it's his business." "But just now he is in constant peril," argued Sibylla. "What can I do? I can only pray for him." Pray for him. The word struck Sibylla forcibly. Had she done this as yet for her husband? She desired, she longed for a helping hand, but as difficult as it is for a tender plant to pierce the hard, dry earth in order to reach the light, even more difficult is it for the obdurate heart to pray for the first time. Necessity teaches supplication. Sibylla now learned to pray, even to cry out of her dire need.
She yearned for church privileges, not for a pile of beautiful architecture, but a house of God, where she might hear God's word. Farther and farther drifted poor Bolton, deeper and deeper sank, while Ulhart drank even more heavily. They went together to undertake some new business ventures at Berlin. Sibylla was filled with forebodings, for when the protecting wand of his home was absent, her husband became hopelessly lost. She felt she must go to him and remain there. She was her husband. Marriage is sworn fidelity. She hurried to Berlin. There she lived in a tavern. Oh, what a life! She recalled her girlish assertions that when she was married, she would never be burdened with household cares, but would board at a hotel because one is so free there. "Oh God, you have punished me for these silly expressions," she cried. What would she not have given now for the comforts of a home? Here every barrier that restrained her husband vanished. In the morning, it was business on the change. Then followed dinner, supper, wine drinking, and card playing. What a life! "May God end this. I can do no more," murmured Sibylla. And he made an end of it, very different from what she had thought. One morning her husband was too ill to rise. A nervous fever had taken possession of him. The physician came and pronounced him unable to be removed. Herr Bolton was now alone with his wife. Friends disappeared, but his misery remained. Sibylla attended him with daily renewed fidelity. We shall not follow the disease in its course. On the 9th day the crisis was reached, and on the 10th day Larkov no longer had a master. He had recognized no one. His mind wandered continually on stocks and bonds, and his last words were 88.5. There are some people whose future life is indeed a mystery to us. What is lost by the discontinuance of such uselessness on earth, or what place they shall occupy in another world, is unknown. Sibylla returned with her husband's body, and he was buried at Larkov. The weary period of suffering had matured Sibylla. The Sibylla who 15 months previously had entered this house as a wife in mourning garments was very different from the one now standing by the open grave in somber garments. After a short time, she permitted a notable notary to take an inventory of all the papers. Creditors came forward. There remained at Larkov nothing to sell. The most favorable result that the careful notary endeavored to bring about, the net proceeds, barely covered the debts. In any case, there was absolutely nothing left for Sibylla. She had entered this house poor, and poor she must depart. But she had learned something there. It was not with hanging head she left Larkov. Although a violent storm had raged and shaken her, it had not struck the young woman, and better principles only stood the firmer and struck their roots the deeper.
This marks the end of chapter 24. We now move into the next chapter of Sibylla's story, titled Duty or Love.
What shall I do? Who will solve the question? What can I do? Who will give me a trial? What must I do? Can I do anything uncomplainingly? So much work for a shroud. "How was that?" said Sibylla to herself one summer evening as she entered the great city of Berlin with her trunks and luggage. Did not the professor in his address assert that before 3 years there would be 24,000 women entering Berlin asking for work? Well, in this year there will be one additional. She had rented a small apartment and entered a new segment of life. Sibylla had no relatives, and her husband only stepsisters who lived in distant countries. Her attorney had kindly suggested a place as companion to an old lady, but she had declined it. She felt that she must be alone and independent in order to throw off any disagreeable impression which might arise in the exertion of self-maintenance. If the rosy morning which she inwardly hoped for were to be followed by a clear day, it must find her untrammeled. She was now 22 years old, but it seemed as though she had been 10 years from Berlin. She felt so aged and self-reliant. Sibylla not only wished to work, but her slender purse absolutely enjoined it. Of all her old acquaintances, she would look for none. The only one for whom she longed, Theodora, was in a foreign land, and she had not heard from her in a long time. Sibylla had corresponded with no one during her period of suffering. She could only have done so at the cost of revealing the acts of her husband, and she was too proud for that. She also avoided the old circle for fear of meeting Ulhart. Perhaps she was safe in this regard, for the unforeseen end of his cruel play had even frightened him. Still, from both, the seclusion in which she lived concealed Sibylla in the great city. She applied for work to a large upholstery establishment where carpets and tapestries were manufactured, and was able to put to practical use the art of drawing in which she was proficient. Instead of being obliged to sew, she designed patterns, and as this work paid better than any other, she gained a living by exercising great industry and economy. She had never dreamed when she drew these designs in other days that these Greek arabesques would in the future provide her bread and butter, and when the first embarrassment of the position was past, she took pleasure in it. But an active spirit like Sibylla's could not be satisfied always with such a life and employment. Her heart promptings asserted that she must do something more. A glance at the wholly useless life which she, as a girl, had led, and which now appeared in a very different light, naturally produced a reaction. She had learned to love and fear God in her trials and affliction. She had seen his strong hand in calamities, and still felt under its pressure. She desired to do good. Had she wasted opportunities in the past? Now she would seek reparation in work. Had she exalted ethics and art above heavenly things? Now she would consign them to a very small part of the earth, seeing that neither truth nor goodness depended on them, although they were made the means of temporal deliverance. And as they had once been the motto for joy and satisfaction, so now her device should be sacrifice and denial. Poor Sibylla. The company with which she was engaged employed 3,000 women and girls. As the work was distributed at certain hours, she must come in contact with the employees. At first, this was not agreeable, but she endured it as a part of the imposed self-sacrifice. One day, a pale young girl sat beside her, counting her wages. "Oh," she said sadly, "only 10 silver groschens for a pair of such fine shoes," and with a sigh, her eyes filled with tears. "Work as hard as I may, I cannot finish them in 2 days." "If you don't like the work," said a superintendent, "I know plenty of women who will be glad to take it." "Must I make 12 pairs of such shoes?" asked the girl. "Cannot you pay me something more?" "We have fixed prices," was the cold reply. Sibylla had listened sympathetically. She followed the pale workwoman, talked kindly to her, questioned her to her earnings, and heard the following. She was the daughter of a humble officer who, at his death, had left behind a sick wife, a younger sister, and herself utterly penniless. The former had only been taught to make fine underwear for ladies by hand, but sewing machines came into use. She was too poor to buy one, and was obliged to give up competition with it. She herself had learned cutting of garments, and had been able to earn enough to supply their table and 15 silver groschens a day. The other sister remained at home, as their mother's physical condition did not permit her to be left alone. "What shall we do," she said, "when I earn so little, and yet I'm glad even to have regular work?"
"How have you managed to live upon such small earnings?" asked Sibylla in astonishment. "Until now, we had a number of valuable articles we could sell, but I have begun to carry our linen and the things we do not actually need to the pawnbrokers. This cannot last long," and the poor girl wept. Sibylla was deeply moved. Heretofore she had only regarded as poor, ragged, miserable-looking people, but here was one beside her in respectable attire. Why must there be want while she, Sibylla, had spent her money on so many foolish, useless things? When the color of a ribbon no longer pleased her, although worn but once, it had been thrown aside, and she had wasted sums of money, more than enough to have sustained this family for a week, upon expensive perfumery, highly scented soaps, and other accessories of the toilet table. Ah, how she lamented her selfishness now! She parted from the poor girl with friendly words, and I can well imagine there was that evening more happiness in that dwelling than its walls had echoed for many months.
The postman brought a letter containing money, and as the sick woman opened it with trembling fingers, a $5 gold piece fell from its folds, with a note containing these words, "An old debt." Sibylla desired to make amends for former failures. She assisted now whom and where she could, even more than she was really able. She deprived herself in order to give to the poor, and there came an hour when she could calmly enjoy an appeased longing for some new, interesting book, for good music, for her cherished museum, having denied herself the pleasure because she regretted the time squandered which she had bestowed upon them. Sibylla's doing was beautiful. Yes, beautiful as a marble statue, which in a favorable light seems to live. We look at it as though the splendid form must move and the warm blood pulsate through it, but it remains cold and immovable, and with gruesome horror we turn away, rejoicing that beings are near us, less beautiful outwardly it may be, but in whom loving hearts throb. One day passed as the other, one month as its forerunner. Out of the months there came a year. But Sibylla was not happy, not contented in her doings. She was painfully impressed that she did not do these things gladly, that every step was a continual self-denial. Yet even this was atonement for her trifling early life, and perhaps in this way she might also make amends for the blame she attached to herself against her dead husband. It had gradually become clear to her that having promised love and fidelity at the altar, she should have given them, but from the first she had gone her own way, unmindful of the happiness and salvation of the man who was her wedded husband. What she had done later did not eradicate the first error, and besides, there was one other recollection that gave her bitter pangs, what she had done to Wolf. She had known her influence over him. How had she exercised it? To the susceptible youth who had sought the truth, she had scornfully and derisively asked, "What is truth?" and then answered, "Joy is truth, happiness is truth. All things else are gloomy specters who must not venture to approach youth. Pluck roses while they bloom." And Wolf had eagerly listened to wisdom from such pure lips. But she had often asked herself, would he have sunken so deeply? Would he have cast overboard his best treasure, his faith, if I had not pointed out the way to him? Such reflections burned her as fire. All her good works could not now extinguish the brand she had kindled in Wolf's heart. She had committed an unpardonable wrong, and who might know how far this influence had been extended beyond him, and how many others been hurled to destruction? It is the curse of bad deeds, they ever bring forth bad weeds. If she could only see Wolf, could tell him how false all that she had believed to be pure gold had proved, if she could only give her testimony that she recognized the value and truth of Christianity, even though she had not been made happy thereby. But why were happiness and the truth eternally divorced? Whosoever seeketh after happiness will fall into an abyss as the rider. Whosoever seeketh after truth will languish in a desert. And Sibylla's brain grew weary over the mystery. She concluded with, rather work, then go out among others unhappier than I. Seeing another's misery enables us better to endure our own. Her poor and her sick became her consolation, but she cared for them, not from love, but rather to escape the thoughts in her own bosom when she felt desolate and lonely.
This marks the end of chapter 25. We now move into the next chapter of Sibylla's story, titled, My Peace I Give Unto You.
Blindfolded and alone I stand, with unknown thresholds on each hand. The darkness deepens as I grope, afraid to fear, afraid to hope. Yet this one thing I learn to know, each day more surely as I go, that doors are opened, ways are made, burdens are lifted or are laid by some great law unseen and still, unfathomed purpose to fulfill, not as I will. Helen Hunt Jackson. More quickly than by rail or the telegraph's electric flash, but upon the wings of fancy we leave Berlin.
piercing hill and valley, over city and river, and passing through the heart of a mountain, we are in the midst of a scene so overwhelmingly beautiful that no one may conceive it without seeing it for himself. We are in Switzerland, old Switzerland, on Lake Lucerne. It is the most sacred water in the country, not only encompassed by heaven-high mountains, but encircled with histories and legends as with an eternal wreath. Here is the ground and faith of the old Swiss memories. Here lie Altdorf, Schweitz, Uri, Rütli, Brunnen, Kusnacht. But the spot needs not the past. The present has tongues enough to allure us hither. Has the eye of Switzerland also bewitched the people in yonder little village, that they have now resided there for several years? Even winter has not driven these strangers away, as the cold season ventures but timidly to enter this sheltered spot, and the cottage where they dwell has felt little of its severity. It is a Swiss chalet, like most of those in the neighborhood, with sloping roof, green lattice, inviting gable rooms, and a pretty garden whose border frames the wonderfully clear, beautiful water. Just now it lies in the sunshine, surrounded by wild vines and cultivated roses. As the door is open, we shall enter. In the first room are two ladies busy with needlework. The elder, of majestic mien, presents an appearance of having seen much life and suffering, but she is attractive, and her expression is kindly, as she says to the young woman sitting near, "Eugenie, will you not see to dinner? It will soon be 1 o'clock, and Theodora will be here presently." "Yes, dear mamma, but do not sew so diligently yourself any longer." The mother smiled and continued to sew on the wedding trousseau of her daughter. How could work be too assiduous under such circumstances? Above, in one of the gable rooms, it is very lively now. Some of the children looking out of the windows are preparing to leave, saying goodbye to a tall young woman in mourning, whose face is partially covered. One cannot but perceive that the warmest bond of love exists between teacher and pupils. Just now, the former enters the mother's apartment and is received with outstretched arms and solicitous inquiry. "Are you tired, Theodora?" An affectionate kiss and the reply follow. "No, dear mother, I seem to grow fresher during these hours," and her large, clear eyes attest the honesty of her words. Soon the three sat down to their simple repast, without the attendance of any servants. Times have greatly changed with the Carings, but for the better. When the family had recovered from the heavy blow of affliction and adversity, Arnold and his bride went to Paris. Lady von Caring took her residence here, at Lake Lucerne, rather than Geneva, because she would be less likely to meet former acquaintances in this retired place. It is true she might have accepted the offer of her daughter-in-law, who had acted nobly and generously, and requested to bear the expense of a modest home for them, as she was especially attached to Theodora. But Theodora refused to consent to such an arrangement. She said she considered it dishonorable for 3 women who were capable of self-maintenance to be dependent on others. She would herself undertake their support if they were willing to assist, so Arnold's wife had been satisfied to render a little assistance, which was gratefully accepted. As there happened to be a number of children belonging to aristocratic Austrian families who resided in the vicinity during the mild winter, Theodora succeeded in obtaining them as pupils and was able to provide for the family. But there was greater success for Theodora. After the frail staff of the world had broken, upon which Lady von Kering and Eugenie had leaned, and that startling occurrence had opened an approaching abyss, their hearts became more susceptible to Theodora's influence, and Theodora was just as cheerful under misfortune as she had been in prosperity. While she carried the smallest care, her soul embraced the highest, and when she laid the money earned into the mother's hand, she shared with her better gifts than eyes could perceive. In the elevating, quiet content of this home, Eugenie had obtained unsought what in vain she had longed for at Berlin. A prominent manufacturer had met Eugenie and paid her addresses, so that the little cottage was now the scene of a very secure, if not very intoxicating happiness. Today, Theodora entered and drew a letter from her pocket. "We're going to have a visitor, dear mother. What do you say about that?" A light blush crossed the mother's face as she replied, "Only no one from Berlin." "Why not?" asked Theodora heartily. "Circumstances can never degrade us. That we can only do ourselves. And then, dear mother, Sibylla Bolton is much unhappier than we are." "Sibylla, the beautiful Sibylla! Where has she lived since her husband's death?" "At Berlin. She finally obtained my address and has written to me. She appears to be unhappy and lonely. I begged her to visit us, and today received her promise, with your permission. May I send that?" Lady von Kering was heartily willing, Eugenie even more so, and Theodora rejoiced to be able to have her sick friend under their hospitable home.
Sibylla had longed to go to Theodora in order to consult her in regard to her future. She felt she must do something substantial to obtain an outward and inward lasting security. She was bewildered and weary, and longed to repose confidence in her stronger friend. That Theodora lived in the beautiful Swiss country which she had never seen was now a minor consideration. She was not one who believes nature can cure a sick soul. And yet today, when she approached the canton of Basel, and leaving at Lucerne the dusty railway coach, entered the boat which lightly cut through the green walls of the lake, when Sibylla looked up and found herself in the midst of a picture so wonderfully beautiful, so charmingly still, while awaiting evening slowly unfolded its pinions, there came over her a calm and peace which she had not experienced for many months. She no longer thought. It was a relief to banish anxious care for the moment and permit the entrancing scene to penetrate her as a perfume. She could do nothing but gaze and yield to the inspiration. Around the lake reared heaven-high mountains, as wonderful and fascinating as the water itself. Here was Pilatus, that bare, indented, misty king, yonder the broad, rocky walls of the Rigi. Suddenly the boat stopped, and Sibylla found herself in Theodora's embrace. How long it had been since a friendly arm had encircled her, since she had been pressed to a warm, loving heart. A beautiful life now began for the poor young woman. She saw first with astonishment the blessing of a regular calling and systematic action. The Kerings impressed her differently and seemed more worthy of regard than in the days of their prosperity. She also learned really to know and appreciate Theodora. Sibylla felt that this good woman understood all her feelings, and she began to realize that the ground of her discontent lay in herself. The two friends had long and earnest communions in their solitary wanderings amid these splendid alpine scenes, or journeying over these beautiful green waters. What had long slumbered in Sibylla's soul and exercised itself unknown finally became clothed in the certainty that henceforth not only the precepts of Christianity should be the rule of conduct in life, but the master of this teaching, Jesus Christ himself, was the Savior and Redeemer who had loosed the bonds of her soul and given her a joyful liberty.
With this knowledge, her heart grew calm, and she knew forgiveness had not only been granted for her own sins of omission, but also for those committed against her mother, her husband, and Wolf. There is a beautiful custom in Switzerland. All the churches stand open to give shelter and peace to those that seek it. Sibylla spent many hours in the little sanctuary of the village, and only God's angels looked upon the quiet corner where she knelt and prayed. Theodora indulged her, refrained from hindering, and only attempted to clear away her doubts. She therefore waited until Sibylla asked advice for the future. The young woman desired to be useful, to live no longer for self, not so much to escape self as formerly, but to establish the relations on better grounds. She wished to associate herself with Theodora in her work elsewhere. This hope was presented on account of Eugenie's prospective marriage, when the mother should live with them, and Theodora would relinquish her claims. She had been urged to accept a home with them, but, she said to Sibylla after a long conversation, "I shall not remain here. My own do not need me. The children can find another teacher any day. I have penetrated too deeply into the misery of the masses, into its temporal and spiritual wretchedness, which seems to be increasing at Berlin. I am free. No one needs me. I am well and have had experience with the poor. It would be a grievous sin if I did not dedicate my life and service where work will never be wanting to me. I have nothing but 2 hands, a desire to work, and a heart which yearns to help you in this labor of love," responded Sibylla beseechingly. "We shall work together, if God wills, at least for a time," was Theodora's reply. "No, always," exclaimed Sibylla fervently. "Time will show," said her companion. Did she dream that a character like Sibylla's could not continually give, but needed a support, and could go through life wishing but little? Theodora did not belong to that class of women who, when their own youth had faded, knew of nothing better than matchmaking among others, deeming it good work if every hero had found a Leander. She thought higher, and left those things to God, believing He was better able to regulate them without her aid. When Sibylla traveled homeward, she kept in view the Alps until she could only see the horizon. They had been the mountains where she had found help. No friendly face greeted her at Berlin. Even her room looked strange. The solitude was burdensome, but she pressed her heart to her breast, looked up, and said, "I am not alone, for Thou, O God, art always with me."
This marks the end of chapter 26. We now move into the next chapter of Sibylla's story, titled Old Friends.
Before everyone stands a picture of what he ought to be. So long as he fails to resemble it, his peace will not be perfect. A. Vollmar. It is time for us to look after Wolf, of whom we have entirely lost sight. We find him at Berlin again, where he is pursuing his studies with renewed zeal. His medical course is almost ended. As he looks upon the familiar dwellings there, his heart sings no song. They are no longer to him full of the mystery of magical beauty as when he first entered the city, but appear rather as whited sepulchres, full of dead men's bones. And yet a spirit of love and forbearance, which manifests itself in goodwill toward everybody, has taken possession of him. He scarcely knows why. It had been Ingeborg's wish that Wolf should make a journey through Switzerland in order to recruit his strength before renewing his studies, and that he should visit Theodora, with whom she had been in constant communication. That had happened, and the beneficial results to his health were realized. Wolf had also endeavored to become familiar with Ingeborg's parting gift. But he had read it with the understanding only, and instead of accepting the central fact and harmonizing the whole from that basis, he dissected the sacred book in detached fragments, and was astonished to find it was not consistent. He wished to talk to Theodora concerning this, but she did not seem to enjoy the discussion of theological quibbles, and yielded to him, as it had been her experience, that in their controversies Wolf was only strengthened in his convictions.
You diverge now from the old faith in which you were reared wholly on account of your hypercritical views, she said to him upon one occasion. But no matter. The time will come when self-evident testimony will reinstate it. For this time, therefore, she waited. It is true, Wolf did not then perceive Theodora's influence upon him, and it was only clear in after years how much he owed to this intercourse with her. Just at present, he only struggled after what was good and right, to recognize strictly moral convictions, and to live henceforth in the performance of duty, placing great reliance and hope in acts of self-denial. He desired only to become a useful factor in the world, and to carry out the work Ingeborg had delegated to him. Sibylla had been married 9 months, and just so much of his life this act had taken away. For Wolf belonged to the few who love but once and love forever. He made no vows of celibacy, for he was so firmly decided on that point as to give it no consideration. But he would live to make others happy, although he could have no happiness. But the rose exhales no more the same since. He often raked up petrified blossoms of a past that the world no longer gave him, just as men learn of the earth's earlier periods by excavating from its interior stony palm trees. His few acquaintances of former years he never sought. It would have been useless. A whirlwind had scattered them all over the world. When his studies were ended, he passed a fine examination, then undertook a long journey, not only to see foreign lands, but to meet distinguished physicians and study in the various hospitals. He couldn't have done anything better. He learned to know many persons for whom he could cherish profound respect, and gained advantages not only to his profession, but to his inner self. By intercourse with strong personalities and association with their work, Wolf learned prompt decision in circumstances and action. His professional knowledge was adjusted without destroying the free development of his own individuality. He attained a self-possession and reliance that gave his will greater freedom for a wider formation of manly maturity. "Erickson is lucky," said his fellow students when they heard of his travels, his life abroad, and the commendations of this or that eminent medical scientist. "I'm luckier than I deserve to be," said Wolf to himself, but his eyes did not betray that thought, nor his purpose become less earnest. In this way 2 years had passed, and he desired to return to Berlin and establish himself in his profession. On his return journey, he stopped at a celebrated watering place on the Rhine. It was a mild autumn evening. The beauty of the place attracted him, and he decided to spend several days there. He found pleasant lodgings near the water and sauntered out to enjoy the air and scene. Later in the evening he dined at the chief hotel, where a great ball was in progress. Wolf gave a glance into the stifling room where misery and physical ails were being danced away and forgotten, and then passed into an adjoining apartment. He escaped from Scylla only to fall into Charybdis, for here card-playing held sway. It was no pleasant sight to see people so absorbed as to appear dead to all surroundings, neither speaking nor thinking, only living in tricks and trumps. What magic power lay hidden in these red and black cards to fascinate so terribly? The same which attracts others to drink. The player would thus intoxicate himself in order to forget all the reality and truth of life. He would banish ennui, trouble, care, grief, qualms of conscience, satiation, in the transient and stifling dominion of gambling. Wolf was about to turn away when he caught a glimpse of a face that seemed even more absorbed and lifeless than the others, but one that made an especial impression upon him. He looked more closely. Yes, there was no doubt. Herr von Lenxering was the player. The first pause impelled him to tap his shoulder and say, "Good evening." Herr von Lenxering sprang up, looked confusedly at Wolf as though the latter had come from another world, and a second look was necessary to convince him of the presence of flesh and blood. Wolf Erickson!
And with these words, Herr von Lenxering collected himself. "Ah, very glad to see you, only I haven't a moment's time. Pique is a tout. I shall not disturb you. Only one question. Is your wife here?" Ah, she is at the ball. Will you not go to her? Please, she'll be glad to see you." And turning away, "Yes, yes, Baron, I will finish playing." And he added to Wolf, "A player never can find an end." Wolf withdrew. He looked again in the ballroom, but despaired to find among these excited dancers, these fashionably attired butterflies, the innocent face of Olga von Steinfeld. This kind of pursuit of happiness was no enticement for him, but had he not once been on the same road? He thought of the lovely being that had once stood before him so earnestly, and with one hard word had torn the veil from his heart. Can you conceive a player or drinker who is not coward? No, for otherwise he would drink and play no longer. She was right. Wolf detested that cowardice now. It was after midnight that he was awakened by a knock on his door. "Doctor, there is a very sick child in the room below. The regular physician is not to be found. Will you please come down?" entreated the speaker. Wolf found a lovely 10-months-old baby suffering from a severe attack of croup. He quickly applied the necessary remedies to avert suffocation in the already convulsed child. The nurse obeyed his instructions amid trembling and tears. After a short time, the immediate danger was past, and both felt relieved.
"Where are the parents of this child?" asked Wolf. "At the ball," replied the woman. "At the ball? And why did you not call them at once?" "Oh, the little dear was hoarse all day, but master thought there was nothing to fear. I must not run and call them for nothing. When the attack came, I did not think it would be so bad, and as I heard a doctor arrived yesterday—" "It was fortunate you called me," interrupted Wolf, "or else the child would have died. But run and call the parents quickly. We are not safe a moment." Oh, I thought he was all right again. The poor little child. But I am all alone. Everybody is asleep. Whom shall I send?" "Go yourself, quickly. I will remain here." The positive, decisive manner of the physician left no room for controversy. In a short time, the child's parents entered. Wolf arose and stood before Herr von Lenxering and his wife. "Your child lies at death's door while you dance and gamble," said Wolf earnestly. What a night that was! The little life hung in the balance as death hovered over the sweet child's cradle. The little hands were wildly flung in the air, and the little face distorted in agony. By its side knelt the mother in her elegant ball dress, her pale face concealed as yet by rouge. Wolf held the baby in his arms, using every means to procure relief. At length the little head was leaning exhausted on his shoulder, and sleep came. Olga wanted to take him. "Shh!" whispered Wolf. "No changing." "But you are not accustomed to such nursing." "I shall hold him so until morning. I think now we shall have a little quiet. Take some rest, my dear madame." "Is the danger past?" Wolf shrugged his shoulders. "Apparently, yes." Olga slipped lightly to the nearest easy chair. Her husband had been asleep on the couch for some time. Wolf sat motionless, listening to the little one's breathing. Conflicting thoughts stirred the mother's heart. When the first outburst of anxiety over her child's life had been somewhat allayed, picture after picture passed over her soul. Shame, burning shame that she had neglected her dearest duty, and that one had witnessed it whose respect she desired. Then her desolate life by the side of her husband, who, satisfied when he had reached his aim, had never been a guide for her, but when she resolved to do better, had always discouraged her, because it was not convenient for his wife to have other regulations than his, which were excessively devoted to pleasure. What a difference between the two men! About the same age, one with a pale, worn face, the other with an earnest expression and a strong physique on which a feeble wife might have reposed so well. Springing up and reaching out both hands to Wolf, she exclaimed, "Help me! Help me!" He turned slightly, but could not give his hand as he still held the little one in his arms. But his sympathy went out to her, even if his mind did not grasp her whole meaning. "I cannot," he said earnestly. "God alone can help it." "What have you spoken?" said the monitor within softly. "God alone is able to help? Who is God? What is God?" When he calmly reflected, the answer came, "Weak women and children have need to believe on a living God. They must have something upon which their tumultuous emotions may rest. They must believe, but men demand knowledge." After the night of dread, morning at length dawned, and Wolf declared the little one beyond danger. Olga scarcely permitted it to be out of her arms. This illness brought her duty as a mother nearer, and the fear of losing her beautiful child made it dearer than before. The father begged Wolf to remain several days with them. "I think it will do my husband and all of us good if you will remain," entreated Olga with emotion. Wolf remained, and discovered that this was a pleasanter married life than he had supposed. The young husband was not really bad. In fact, he would rather do right than wrong, but his will was weak, and consequently passion, indiscretion, and the force of habit constantly obtained the victory. "If my husband only had a true friend," lamented Olga. "Since you have been here, he is so different." "You must be his friend," replied Wolf. "Me? Oh, how can I? Besides, he is never at home." "Make your home so pleasant that he will desire to be there. Strengthen his vacillating purposes," advised Wolf. "That is indeed a difficult task," sighed Olga. "Who will strengthen me, then?" "Your better self and your child. You dare not think chiefly of yourself. When you see your husband in a burning house, rescue him yourself," added Wolf earnestly. They had many similar conversations. On one occasion, Olga innocently related the circumstances of Herr Bolton's death. Wolf sprang to his feet in speechless astonishment. "Did you not know that he had been dead nearly 2 years?" asked Olga in surprise. "Nearly 2 years? Just the time I've been traveling abroad." Then Olga imparted what she knew of Sibylla, of the unhappy end of their marriage, and the role that Ulhart had played. Wolf gnashed his teeth. "The infamous wretch! He also wished to ruin me, and came very near to accomplishing it. But where is Frau Bolton now?" Olga blushed. "I am ashamed of myself. I visited her at Larkov shortly before my wedding, and learned there what I have told you. But since that time I know nothing more about her. I have heard she is governess in an Austrian family." "In her need she stood alone, then?" reproached Wolf. "And you did not trouble yourself about her?" Olga wept. "Oh, I have been a wretched wife, mother, and friend. How could I have behaved so? If Dr. Ulhart had only troubled himself as little about Sibylla as I have." "Ulhart? How so?" And, like an open book, Olga gave Wolf information that threw light on all Ulhart's deceitful ways, how he sought by letters and conversation to injure and belie him in order to drive him from Berlin, and when this was not accomplished, to ruin him. "But what had he against me?" asked Wolf. "He wanted to drive you away from Sibylla." "Yes, that was evident. But why did he desire that? I was no hindrance to him." Olga opened her eyes ingenuously. "Oh, this fellow was more clever than all of us, and could read our hearts better than ourselves. He knew that you alone were dangerous to Sibylla. He saw that Sibylla loved you." "Me?" interjected Wolf. "Ulhart loved Sibylla with a consuming passion, and that reason saw more deeply than Sibylla herself, but she feared him as her greatest enemy. Oh, wherever he may be, I know he will never give up the wild chase after her." A sudden pang thrilled Wolf and would not permit him to remain longer at this place. He would go to Berlin, institute inquiries, write to Theodora. The Lenkserings parted with him reluctantly, and had good reasons therefor. If the husband's life had undergone no transformation, a stone had been thrown into the stagnant water. A stone, the widths and circles of whose influence reached perhaps to the very shores of eternity.
This is the end of Part 8. Sibylla's story continues, and we will carry on in the next video. Thank you for listening, and remember to subscribe to the channel for more content. See you in Part 9 of Sibylla's story.